Hi, I'm Rob Scott from UC Today, and thanks for joining us. Today, I'm here with Garth Landers, who's the Director of Global Product Marketing at Theta Lake, to discuss how compliance leaders can fully embrace Zoom's ecosystem, from Zoom meetings and phone to Workvivo, without compliance bottlenecks. So this is crucial for organizations that have adopted Zoom or about to adopt Zoom. And in this session, we're going to dig into real-world use cases, best practices, and the future of AI-driven compliance in digital collaboration. So welcome, Garth. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. Keen to get started. So let's just cut to the chase, Garth. I mean, Zoom is evolving at lightning speed, as we all know, and compliance and IT teams are scrambling to keep up. What's the biggest compliance crisis hitting organizations using Zoom right now?
Yeah, I don't want to, single out Zoom and say they have more compliance challenges than other offerings. I think, the biggest challenge organizations face when using Zoom is that, Zoom is a leader in this space. And one of the hallmarks of their offerings and their portfolio is really that breadth and depth, rich number of features, the number of modalities that you talked about in terms of it's more than meetings, it's elements in the meeting, QA, polling, whiteboards, it's phone, as you mentioned, and, SMS, which is part of phone. It's contact center, it's docs, it's all encompassing, and whiteboards as well, separate whiteboard applications, and much more. So the challenge with all of that, and of course that encompasses, e-coms, textual communications, audio, video, and visual communications. All of that can seem really overwhelming to organizations, particularly compliance regulated organizations and their compliance departments, which see, an exponential growth in content that they have to potentially review and retain and understand the context of. All of that, while of course identifying risk in those conversations, which can happen, across all of the different modalities, and that could seem overwhelming to them. I think, the other challenges that organizations face when working with platforms like Zoom is because of its cloud SaaS-based nature. It's being developed and releases and updates and improvements and new functionality and capabilities are being released all of the time. And that, too, is a strength of Zoom. But at the same time, organizations have to grapple with that. They might not be aware in highly decentralized environments, what they're getting, what they're using, what the impact is, and if it leads to any potential compliance gaps in the organization. And then I think there are a couple of other things at play here, too. Of course, users are really excited to embrace all of this. We're going to be talking about Zoom AI Companion in a bit. And why not? Why wouldn't you want to turn on and embrace that functionality and make the most of it and be more productive? So, of course, they're grappling with that. And how do they balance sort of productivity needs with governance and compliance obligations? And then the last point really is around, heritage or legacy vendors. And, we're going to talk about digital communications governance and archiving. What about other vendors that are making claims and say, well, we support Zoom, and, what does that mean? And trying to make sense and understand, does my vendor that originated in a space like email archiving support everything we've talked about thus far, and trying to find the right fit and the right solutions for, managing and responding and meeting your regulatory and governance and compliance obligations.
Well, it certainly is a lot to think about, and AI is probably one of the biggest disruptors in this, in the whole world of digital collaboration nowadays. And it's a real compliance minefield, isn't it? So how are companies getting behind these challenges with compliance? And when it comes to things like Zoom AI Companion, what are they doing to kind of overcome some of these challenges?
Great question. And yes, certainly AI Companion is, one of the newer offerings and something that's really become quite mainstream. You can turn on your television, your streaming service, look at YouTube. You're going to run into ads, adverts, and advertisements for AI Companion everywhere. It's just really enter the mainstream lexicon and understanding of what things people are doing. I think the challenge is, what they're finding, what organizations see, is that it's all encompassing, right? It's an amazing set of technologies that encompass really email usage, meetings, of course, when we talk about things like summary, even phone, whiteboards, docs. So, it encompasses a number of different use cases, not just summarizing information, which is really important, but also auto completing and helping, helping humans, helping users like you and me construct new content, right? So trying to make sense of what all of that means is sort of a challenge. I think that other trend we just talked about in terms of, the eagerness of employees wanting to use it also adds to a little bit of the pressure. And it doesn't always mean that every use case is a regulatory one, even in regulated organizations, right? So we've actually issued some guidance to that along those lines to our customers and clients and what we call compliance considerations. So I would urge our customers and clients to reach out to us and look at the compliance considerations piece for Zoom AI Companion and what it means and help them understand and identify different use cases. All of that said, right, you still have an obligation, and regulators have made it clear recently that they don't care if information is human or machine generated. If it involves advertising, claims, promises, obviously it cannot be misleading. And, even the best tools using Gen AI today are prone to potential, hallucinations and such. So you do need to proofread, understand, review, look at all of that, in addition to, of course, capturing it, identifying it, managing it for risk detections and record keeping and retention overall.
Yeah, some really good points there. Let's talk about Workvivo for a moment, because that's a really popular workplace engagement platform within Zoom. But how does it impact compliance risks? Are businesses prepared for the kind of governance challenges of these kind of, I suppose, merging the social world with collaboration and enterprise communications? How's that playing out?
Yeah, I would say, Workvivo is incredibly popular as well. And I think, for us, we see this as a emerging area, right, in employee engagement platforms, as you put it. This is something that, our digital, our personal, our workplace are all sort of merging together, and organizations are very keen to make sure that they have an environment where people can collaborate, team up, but also maybe, respond, have fun, work together, and create part of a virtual office. So it does have its own compliance risks. Certainly, you are creating textual written content, for example, that might be, if you're generating content that, is regarded as business as such, right? And that's a regulatory term. Yeah. It might need to be retained. It might need to be supervised for risk. So you do need to have the proper controls and management in place to make sure that, you are managing to your regulatory obligations. So the answer to that is a strong yes. Of course, Theta Lake has recently come out with the first in industry support for Workvivo. So we'll be showcasing that. And, we start, as we always do, with seamless integration at the application and platform level so that we work seamlessly with Workvivo, don't disrupt that environment, and begin with capturing all of the essential elements so that they can be stored downstream and retained for record keeping purposes. And of course, if you do have an obligation and need to search that content, respond to governance events like audits, investigations, litigation, if you need to review it for supervisory purposes and detect risk, you can do that as well. So that is something we see that is emerging. And again, speaks to that challenge that organizations have, that there's this incredible breadth of, textual, audio, visual communications, the files, the emojis, right? How do you make sense of all of that? How do you preserve the context? How do you identify a risk?
Yeah, it's very interesting, especially with emojis. Anything can happen. Well, I wanted to touch on digital communications governance and archiving because DCGA, we're hearing a lot about that nowadays. Can you just walk us through what does that actually mean in practice and in context with Theta Lake and Zoom?
Yeah, great question. And so Digital Communications Governance and Archiving, or DCGA, another acronym for all of us to learn, is a newly created market segment that has evolved from, heritage spaces like email archiving to really encompass today's modern communications and collaboration platforms like Zoom. So, it's really something that's required for organizations that need to govern, respond to governance events, detect risk in all of the aforementioned different modalities: audio, visual, textual communications. And that makes it a challenge. It also means that there are different, offerings out there that are making different claims. We had a tremendous case study in success with a firm named Osaic, which is a network of wealth advisors that had saw an uptick in their outbound video communications to their clients and customers. And as such, realized they had a regulatory obligation to retain and supervise them. Now, what Osaic started out doing with these meeting videos from Zoom was taking up to 100 minutes per video to identify, the meeting video, to retain it, to manually review it. And just to keep the scale in mind, at that time, Osaic had up to 10,000 representatives. Now, as you can imagine, that is a great deal and great amount of work that was required. It didn't mean that, as part of that sort of manual homegrown process, it didn't mean that they were necessarily could guarantee that they were identifying the risk, and that, this was essentially a very large ad hoc process because, how would you capture learnings of risk detection? How would you identify trends? How would you identify users that maybe required more training and were, maybe somewhat problematic, right, in terms of their outbound communications? Osaic worked with Theta Lake and implemented us. And as you know, Theta Lake has been a pioneer in terms of video capture, retention, and risk detection for digital communications governance and archiving since our very beginning in 2017. That is a very important distinction too, in terms of the risk detection, because, risk detection in video might mean, what's going on during a screen share, what's going on with the motion that a user like myself is making during a meeting. What if I'm holding up a note that contains some sort of information meant to communicate? So the words, the action, the language, the movement, all of those things, can carry pieces of risk during a video meeting. And so they implemented us to do that. And a big part of our success in working together was to create custom detections, right? We have a number of baseline, dozens and dozens of, baseline detections that are come with our product, with Theta Lake, risk and compliance suite. And then, you could create incremental, very easy permutations based on those risk detections. And that was something that Osaic had rapid success doing. And, today, as soon as, a advisor pushes record, for the meeting, the data is flowing seamlessly into Theta Lake's SEC 17A4, impenetrable or immutable archive, right? So that too is a very important part of record keeping obligations. So as part of this, they saved enormous amounts of time, introduced a frictionless alternative to a, cumbersome, burdensome, time-intensive, resource-intensive sort of process that they had. And as such, they were able to introduce other processes as a result, in terms of identifying users who should be the people that are, enabled and permitted to create outbound communications and, start to refine and put some controls and measures around that. So that was a great example of a customer using Zoom and Theta Lake and realizing some sizable impact.
I was going to say incredible return on investment and value there from an efficiency and productivity point of view, let alone, that
For certain.
Peace of mind.
We're talking about an average of 100 minutes per video review, right?
Yeah.
Which
Wow.
multiplied across, thousands of advisors. How can you do that? And then there was actually the storage and retention of all of those videos, which, grows, it becomes difficult to organize, to index, and, costly as well. So less than ideal. So
absolutely.
with Theta Lake, they eliminated those concerns very easily.
Well, let's go from success to failure. So with regulators, tightening their grip on AI-generated content and digital communications, what's the worst case scenario for a company that ignores compliance within a Zoom-style environment? And are we talking lawsuits, fines, or what's happening out there right now?
Yeah, great question. I think we've seen over the last 4 years that regulators worldwide, the SEC, the FCA in the UK, they've carried out $4 billion US dollars in the last 4 years in terms of fines and sanctions. That's pretty sizable, $4 billion, right? As you can imagine. And, some firms have had really, material impacts in terms of those fines. Now, I think the intent at the time when we talked about 4 years, regulators were making it very clear that organizations had an obligation to really make sure that they were keeping current with current technology, best practices, implementing, realistic controls, and, not saying you're not, sort of not aware or ignorant is no longer an excuse, right? That mission has been made very clear. As such, we've seen somewhat of a slowdown in terms of regulatory fines, maybe not as high profile, but they're still occurring. They're still happening to the amount of, $80, $70, $90, $100,000 for some of these record keeping and supervisory fines. So very, very big still, but personal accountability is starting to come into play. So,
Really?
You being named as an individual, that could be, challenging and problematic for your career. So everybody's on notice. With regards to other sort of governance events, things like litigation, that's always a possibility. And it'll be interesting to see with things like generative AI, what that involves and, what people see in terms of, the impact to them and, if there's any sort of misleading or AI hallucination generated content that has a negative impact, it's possible we'll see more of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, it is a minefield, isn't it? If I'm an enterprise CIO, IT director, or let's say a compliance officer, what's the one red flag that should make me pick up the phone and call Theta Lake immediately?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the things that we see, particularly in the area of Zoom, which is our discussion today, is that vendor claims can be very misleading. I think Zoom being as popular a vendor and successful as a platform offering as there is in unified communications today, you'll see a lot of misleading statements from vendors. Vendors all seem to claim to support Zoom, but it's really very misleading when comparing the question, comparing us to Theta Lake, comparing them to Theta Lake. The questions I would have at any of those individual levels are, what does that mean? Are they supporting all of the modalities? Are they supporting, not only meetings, but the audio, the video, the in-meeting elements, the meeting Q&A, the polling, the whiteboards in those meetings? Are they supporting the audio in Zoom Phone, the SMS in Zoom Phone? Are they supporting the contact centers and all of the recordings and transcripts that occur there? Are they supporting, all of the other applications associated with Zoom today, like what we've talked about with, Workvivo, for example? are they keeping pace with Zoom's development, right? As we know, compliance gaps can arise. Are they, keeping pace with Zoom's development in the sense that, is Zoom invested in them or embedding their technology like Zoom is today with Theta Lake with Zoom Compliance Manager, which is in fact powered by Theta Lake and a part of Zoom's stack and portfolio so that you can use our features and capabilities right along with your Zoom offerings. Vendor claims are misleading when it comes to visual and audio communications. Transcripts alone are not a substitute for those things. And as I mentioned, what about whiteboards? I think all of this, really poses a challenge for organizations using Zoom when they consider the future, right? And they want to make sure that, a vendor that they're considering is not just sort of a stopgap measure, something that plugs a hole that supports a certain modality today, but isn't going to be there tomorrow to keep pace with and partner with Zoom, as Zoom has with Theta Lake. So those are some of the things they should look for.
Superb. Well, I mean, in terms of connecting with Theta Lake, are you at Enterprise Connect in March?
Yes, we'll be at Enterprise Connect in March. We'll have a spot on a panel. We'll have a booth. I'd invite you to stop by and learn about Theta Lake's visionary status. I say that because we were recently named a visionary in the first Gartner Digital Communications Governance and Archiving Magic Quadrant, which we're very proud of. And then if you'll also see the accompanying document from Gartner, the critical capabilities for DCGA, you'll find that we were ranked, the top in 3 of 5 categories, and in the top 4 in all 5 categories. So,
Nice.
Really great product evaluations. We'll be talking about those things as well as showing our Workvivo offering and much, much more. Theta Lake is a platform, which was recently announced also. So we'd invite you to stop by and take a look and look forward to hearing from you.
Well, that's a wrap. A huge thanks to Garth for sharing these critical insights into Zoom compliance and governance. As we've covered today, folks, the compliance landscape for Zoom is shifting fast. AI, Workvivo, and new collaboration tools are changing the way organizations communicate. But without proper governance, businesses are exposed to major security risks, regulatory scrutiny, and even financial penalties. So if you're a compliance officer or an IT leader or even a security professional and you're wondering if your Zoom environment is truly compliant, now is the time to act. Theta Lake is the trusted partner for enterprise-grade compliance, ensuring you can unlock the full potential of Zoom without the risk. So to learn more, head over to the links below where you can find lots of essential resources on UC Today, including expert insights, the latest compliance updates, and ways to connect directly with Theta Lake's team. And don't forget, subscribe to UC Today for all the latest on unified communications, collaboration, and compliance. I'm Rob Scott from UC Today. Thanks for watching.